On a crisp spring morning in 2025, as the city of Washington, D.C. stirred to life, few could have predicted the economic earthquake about to shake the continent. President Donald Trump, standing before a packed press room at the White House, announced sweeping new tariffs targeting America's closest allies, Canada and Mexico. The news flashed across screens worldwide, sending shockwaves through financial markets and boardrooms alike. The administration imposed a 25% tariff on cars, steel and aluminum imported from Canada and Mexico. This sudden move disrupted decades of cross-border cooperation in the North American auto industry, an industry built on seamless supply chains and mutual trust. The intention was clear, to bring manufacturing jobs back to the United States. But the reality was far more complicated. Almost overnight, the North American supply chain was crippled, leaving factories and workers in limbo. Production lines in Michigan and Ohio slowed to a crawl, as critical parts and materials became tangled in new layers of bureaucracy and cost. Car parks at border crossings filled with unsold vehicles, each one a symbol of stalled commerce and uncertainty. Trucks carrying auto parts and finished cars backed up for miles, waiting for clearance that now came with a hefty price tag. The very industry these tariffs aimed to protect became the first casualty. Billions of dollars bled from the American economy as stock prices tumbled, dealerships emptied, and executives scrambled to adapt to the new reality. The decision fractured a vital continental alliance, leaving business owners and workers on both sides of the border scrambling for answers. Long-standing partnerships were suddenly at risk, and uncertainty clouded the future of thousands of families. As the dust settled, the stage was set for a high-stakes confrontation. In Ottawa, lawmakers prepared a forceful response, signaling that Canada would not back down. The world watched as a new era of trade conflict threatened to escalate, with consequences that would ripple far beyond North America. To grasp the chaos of 2025, we need to look beyond the headlines and understand the deeper forces at play. The global economy was in turmoil, and much of the confusion stemmed from a single controversial idea: President Trump's approach to tariffs. At the heart of his trade policy was the concept of reciprocal tariffs. Trump believed that if another country imposed a tariff on American goods, the U.S. should respond in kind, matching their rates dollar for dollar. This was his way of signaling strength and fairness, a message he repeated at rallies and summits alike. He argued that the U.S. had been taken advantage of for decades, with foreign nations slapping high tariffs on American products while enjoying easy access to U.S. markets. So, if a country charged a 25% tariff, America would do the same, aiming to level the playing field. But the administration's formula for deciding these tariffs was anything but transparent. Instead of strictly mirroring foreign tariffs, decisions were often based on broad trade imbalances or political calculations, not actual numbers. This led to unpredictable and sometimes bizarre outcomes, leaving businesses and analysts scrambling to keep up. Even countries with low trade barriers like Switzerland suddenly found themselves facing steep U.S. tariffs. This sent shockwaves through global markets, as allies and trading partners struggled to make sense of the new rules and their potential impact. The process for removing or adjusting tariffs was equally murky. There was no clear path for negotiation or appeal. Everything rested on the president's personal discretion. This turned American trade policy into a high-stakes guessing game, where decisions could change overnight. This America First approach, while popular with some voters, ended up isolating key allies and destabilizing financial markets. Decades of carefully built economic cooperation were suddenly at risk, as uncertainty spread across the globe. Canada and Mexico, America's closest neighbors and partners in the USMCA, were hit especially hard. Tariffs on their goods contradicted the very spirit of free trade that the agreement was supposed to uphold, straining relationships that had taken years to build. The Trump administration believed these aggressive tariffs would force other countries to make concessions at the negotiating table. But they underestimated the political and economic resolve of America's partners, who saw the tariffs as an attack rather than an invitation to compromise. Instead of backing down, Canada, Mexico, and other allies began preparing to retaliate, signaling a new era of trade conflict and uncertainty for the world economy. The tariffs paralyzed the North American auto industry, built on seamless cross-border supply chains. Parts and vehicles, once moving freely between US and Canadian factories, were stranded overnight. An estimated 1.8 million vehicles were stuck in limbo, many American-branded but now subject to crippling taxes. General Motors alone projected losses of $4.5 billion in 2025, threatening jobs and future investments. The cost of building cars soared, making U.S. automakers less competitive globally. The administration misunderstood modern manufacturing. By taxing Canadian parts, it was taxing its own industry. The policy, meant to punish trading partners, inflicted deep wounds on American companies and workers. Factory floors fell silent, and border crossings became graveyards for unsellable cars. The tariffs backfired, turning a strategic move into a costly blunder. When President Trump's team imposed harsh tariffs, they fully expected Canada to fold under pressure. But instead of backing down, Ottawa responded with a level of resolve and unity that caught Washington off guard. The Canadian government, long seen as a reliable ally, now stood at a crossroads, determined to defend its national interests and economic sovereignty. Prime Minister Mark Carney wasted no time. He led his cabinet in crafting a swift, strategic retaliation, announcing $22 billion in tariffs on a wide range of U.S. goods. These measures were carefully targeted, hitting key American industries from steel and aluminum to agricultural products and consumer goods, sending a clear message that Canada would not be intimidated. Canada matched the U.S. metal tariffs dollar for dollar, ensuring that every American move was met with an equal Canadian response. The tariffs rippled through sectors vital to both economies, affecting everything from farm exports to auto parts and household products. Canadian manufacturers and exporters braced for impact, but the government's resolve never wavered. The response was more than just economic policy. It ignited a wave of anti-American sentiment across the country. Grassroots campaigns sprang up overnight, urging Canadians to boycott U.S. goods and support local businesses. Supermarkets saw empty shelves where American products once stood, and protests erupted in cities nationwide. Carney's tough stance rallied Canadians from coast to coast. Political rivals set aside their differences, and citizens united behind their government's firm response. The crisis became a defining moment for national identity, strengthening Carney's political position and signaling to the world that Canada was prepared for a prolonged struggle. "We are over the shock of the American betrayal," Carney declared in a passionate speech, his words echoing the national mood. The sense of unity and determination was palpable, as Canadians resolved to stand together in the face of adversity. Canada proved it would not be bullied. The government escalated the conflict with tough negotiations and unwavering resolve, making it clear that a quick or easy resolution was now out of reach. Tensions at the border and in diplomatic circles continued to rise. The retaliation transformed Trump's gamble into a full-scale, two-sided economic war. Markets reacted with volatility, and headlines warned of a deepening trade conflict that threatened jobs and industries on both sides of the border. The United States now faced a determined and united neighbor, one that refused to be a compliant partner, and instead stood ready to defend its values, its economy, and its people, no matter the cost. The trade war's impact rippled far beyond the auto industry, hitting American households and small businesses hard. Prices for goods containing steel and aluminum, from washing machines to canned soup, rose steadily. New cars became scarce and unaffordable for many families. Small businesses, unable to absorb higher costs, faced tough choices: raise prices or risk closure. Border communities suffered as Canadian tourists stayed home, hurting local shops and hotels. The tariffs acted as a regressive tax, with U.S. consumers and companies bearing the brunt. The trade war's invisible costs, lost jobs, delayed purchases, struggling businesses were felt across the nation. As the crisis deepened, leaders and experts offered starkly different perspectives. President Trump remained defiant, insisting the tariffs were necessary to protect American workers. Prime Minister Carney, by contrast, positioned Canada as a defender of fair trade, vowing not to forget the betrayal. GM CEO Mary Barra's warning of billions in losses gave a sobering, data-driven counterpoint to political rhetoric. Trade experts like Scott Lincecum called the strategy reckless, warning it ignored political realities and would backfire. Their predictions proved correct as the economic damage mounted. The voices of business and policy experts highlighted the real-world costs of the tariff war. The 2025 trade war echoed Trump's earlier tariff battles in 2018-2019. Back then, tariffs on Canadian and Mexican steel and aluminum sparked retaliation and economic pain for U.S. farmers and manufacturers. The earlier dispute ended with the U.S. lifting tariffs, admitting the policy had done more harm than good. For a moment, it seemed lessons had been learned about the dangers of protectionism. But in 2025 the administration doubled down, this time targeting the auto sector from the start. The result, a far more damaging and costly sequel, as history's warnings were ignored. The past was prologue to a crisis that could have been avoided. The 2025 tariff crisis exposed the dangers of protectionism in a globalized world. Modern supply chains are deeply integrated. Punishing a neighbor means harming yourself. The US auto industry builds cars with Canada, not just for Canada. Trade is not zero-sum. Tariffs triggered retaliation, raised prices, and shrank markets for American exporters. The belief that Canada would simply yield was a grave miscalculation. Instead, the tariffs strengthened Canada's resolve and damaged America's standing. Ultimately, tariffs are taxes paid by American consumers and businesses, not foreign governments. The self-inflicted wounds of this trade war served no strategic purpose, only isolation and economic pain. As of July 2025, the US-Canada trade relationship remains in crisis, with tariffs still in place and economic damage mounting. The path forward demands more than negotiations. It requires removing destructive tariffs and acknowledging the value of integrated supply chains. Abandoning the flawed reciprocal doctrine and honoring the USMCA's spirit is essential for rebuilding trust. Targeted support for affected industries and communities will be needed to recover. The lesson is clear: prosperity grows through cooperation, not conflict. The challenge now is to learn from this costly mistake and recommit to free and fair trade.